Have you ever believed that one moment could erase years of love, trust, and sacrifice? Imagine spending your life building a family, believing every late-night phone call had an innocent explanation, every business dinner was just another meeting, and every promise made at the dinner table still meant something. Then, one ordinary evening, a single discovery changes everything. The person you trusted most is living a secret life, and suddenly nothing feels real anymore. But what if the biggest betrayal wasn't the end of the story? What if the words spoken years later at your own daughter's wedding changed everything you thought you knew? Today's story is one that has shocked thousands of people because it isn't just about a broken marriage. It's about betrayal, heartbreak, pride, revenge, family, forgiveness, and the unexpected consequences of every choice we make. If you enjoy emotional relationship stories, true-style family drama, and unforgettable life lessons, stay with me until the very end because this story takes turns that no one sees coming. For years, I believed my marriage was stable. My wife and I had built a comfortable life together. We had a beautiful daughter, a nice home, and dreams that seemed completely ordinary. Like many couples, we argued sometimes, but nothing ever seemed serious enough to make me question our future. I worked hard to provide for my family, while my wife focused on growing her career. I was proud of her success. I encouraged her promotions, celebrated her achievements, and trusted her completely. Then little things started changing. She began staying late at work more often. Weekend meetings became normal. Her phone never left her side. Conversations that once came naturally became short and distant. Whenever I asked if everything was okay, she smiled and blamed stress, deadlines, or new responsibilities. I wanted to believe her because trust is easier than suspicion when you truly love someone. But sometimes your instincts whisper long before the truth arrives. Friends noticed the distance between us before I did. My daughter quietly asked why her mother always seemed busy. Even family gatherings felt different. My wife smiled for everyone else, yet somehow there was an invisible wall between us whenever we were alone. I convinced myself that every marriage goes through difficult seasons. I kept hoping tomorrow would bring back the woman I married. Then came the day that changed my life forever. It wasn't some dramatic movie scene. There were no shouting matches or shocking public confrontations. Instead, it started with one unexpected moment, one conversation I was never supposed to hear, and one detail that refused to leave my mind. The truth slowly unfolded piece by piece until there was no escaping it. My wife had crossed a line I never imagined she would cross, and the person involved wasn't a stranger. It was her boss. In a single instant, years of memories became impossible to look at the same way. Every celebration, every family vacation, every anniversary suddenly felt different. Questions filled my mind faster than answers ever could. How long had this been happening? Was any part of our marriage still real? Had everyone else known before I did? The pain wasn't just about losing my wife. It was about losing the future I believed we were building together. It was about looking into my daughter's eyes and wondering how this would affect her life. It was about deciding whether anger would define my future or whether I could somehow find another path. At first, I thought I knew exactly what I needed to do. I believed making choices out of hurt would finally give me peace. I convinced myself that if I could make the people who caused my pain face the consequences, the emptiness inside me would disappear. Looking back now, I realize pain has a way of convincing us that revenge and healing are the same thing even when they aren't. The years that followed changed everyone involved. Relationships ended. Lives moved in unexpected directions. Some people found success. Others carried regrets they never spoke about. My daughter grew up watching two parents whose decisions shaped her childhood in ways neither of us fully understood. Eventually, time carried us toward a day that should have been filled with nothing but happiness: our daughter's wedding. Families reunited. Old faces returned. Smiles covered years of silence. It was supposed to be a celebration, a fresh beginning, and a chance to leave the past where it belonged. I believed I had prepared myself for seeing my ex-wife again after everything that had happened. I couldn't have been more wrong. Because just when I thought the story had finally reached its ending, she walked toward me, looked me directly in the eyes, and quietly said something I never expected to hear. Those few words stopped me cold. In that moment, everything I believed about the past, my decisions, and the price we had all paid suddenly came into question. What she revealed at our daughter's wedding would force me to rethink everything and whether the greatest mistake of my life had happened long after the betrayal itself. And that's where our story truly begins. The room around us faded into the background. Music was playing, guests were laughing, and cameras were flashing as my daughter celebrated one of the happiest days of her life. Yet all I could focus on were those few words my ex-wife had just spoken. Her voice wasn't angry or emotional. It was calm, almost hesitant, like someone carrying a burden for years without knowing how to put it down. Before I could ask her what she meant, someone called her name from across the room. She gave me one last look, turned away, and disappeared into the crowd, leaving me standing there with more questions than answers. I wanted to follow her, but I couldn't. My daughter was looking for me. It was time for our father-daughter dance, and nothing was more important than being present for her. So I forced myself to smile, pushed the questions to the back of my mind, and stepped onto the dance floor. As we danced, she smiled the same way she had when she was a little girl standing on my shoes, pretending we were dancing in the living room. For a few minutes, the past didn't exist. It was just a father and his daughter sharing a moment neither of them would ever forget. But memories have a way of returning when you least expect them. Watching my daughter laugh with her friends reminded me of the years when she was caught between two parents trying to rebuild their lives after the divorce. I had always believed I was protecting her by keeping the details of our marriage to myself. No matter how hurt I felt, I never wanted her to choose sides. She deserved two parents who loved her, even if they could no longer live under the same roof. Looking back now, I realize that silence can sometimes create as many questions as the truth itself. My daughter rarely asked what had happened between her mother and me. Maybe she already knew more than I realized. Maybe she had simply learned that some questions were too painful to ask. As the evening continued, I couldn't stop replaying the past in my mind. Every conversation, every strange excuse, every moment I had ignored because I wanted to believe my marriage was stronger than my doubts. There had been signs, small ones at first, but I had brushed them aside. Love has a strange way of making ordinary explanations feel more believable than uncomfortable truths. What I didn't know then was that one seemingly ordinary work event would become the first piece of a puzzle that would eventually change all of our lives forever. At the time, I didn't think much about the invitation. My wife's company was hosting an annual celebration to recognize employees and management. She told me spouses were welcome, but just a few days before the event she casually mentioned that attendance would be limited because of a last-minute change in seating. She insisted it wasn't a big deal and said she'd rather I spend the evening relaxing at home. I smiled, wished her a good time, and never questioned it. The next morning, she came home looking more exhausted than excited. She said the event had gone on longer than expected and that everyone had stayed late talking about new projects. It sounded reasonable. After all, I had no reason to doubt her. I even made breakfast while she rested, thinking she simply had a demanding job and needed my support. Over the following weeks, however, little moments began to stand out. She laughed at messages that she quickly cleared from her phone. She became unusually protective of her work life, saying I wouldn't understand the pressure she was under. It wasn't what she said that bothered me, it was how different she had become. The warmth that once filled our conversations slowly turned into polite exchanges, and the easy connection we shared felt harder to find. At the same time, our daughter noticed the change in the house. She would ask if we could all have dinner together like we used to or suggest a family movie night. We always agreed, but somehow work, schedules, or unexpected commitments seemed to get in the way. I could see the disappointment on her face, and that hurt more than I wanted to admit. Then an unexpected conversation with someone who worked at my wife's company planted a small seed of doubt. It wasn't an accusation or a dramatic revelation. It was just one casual remark that didn't match the story I had been told. At first, I tried to ignore it. But once that question entered my mind, it became impossible to silence, and I found myself wondering whether I truly knew what had been happening behind the scenes. From that day on, I started noticing details I would have overlooked before. Nothing by itself seemed important, but together they painted a picture that was becoming harder to ignore. My wife would leave for work earlier than usual and sometimes return hours after she said she would. When I asked how her day had gone, her answers became shorter, almost rehearsed, as if she wanted the conversation to end before it really began. I hated the fact that I was beginning to question someone I had trusted for so many years. Every time I caught myself wondering if something was wrong, another part of me insisted I was overthinking everything. I reminded myself that strong marriages are built on trust, not suspicion. Still, the uneasy feeling refused to disappear. One afternoon, while organizing some paperwork at home, I came across a receipt from a restaurant neither of us had ever talked about. It was dated on a night she had told me she was working late at the office. There could have been a simple explanation, and I wanted to believe there was. But the timing stayed in my mind long after I put the receipt away. Over the next few days, I wrestled with a decision I never imagined I would face. Should I ask her directly and risk accusing her unfairly? Or should I keep pretending everything was normal until the truth revealed itself on its own? Neither choice felt right, and the uncertainty was becoming exhausting. Then something happened that made the questions impossible to ignore. A message appeared at exactly the wrong moment. It wasn't dramatic or obvious, but it was unexpected enough to stop both of us in our tracks. For a brief second, I saw the expression on my wife's face change from calm to startled. She reached for her phone almost instantly, but that single moment told me more than words ever could. I didn't know what the message said. I didn't know who had sent it. But deep down, I knew our lives were about to change in ways neither of us could have imagined. The answers I had been searching for were finally within reach, and I wasn't sure I was ready to hear them. For the rest of that evening, neither of us mentioned the message. She acted as if nothing unusual had happened, asking ordinary questions about dinner and our daughter's school project. I answered just enough to keep the conversation moving, but my mind was somewhere else. That brief look on her face had stayed with me. It wasn't guilt I thought I saw, it was fear. Fear that I had noticed something she wasn't ready to explain. The next few days felt different. We were living in the same house, yet it seemed like we were on opposite sides of an invisible wall. Every conversation became careful. Every smile felt forced. Even our daughter noticed the quiet, asking if everything was okay. We both assured her that work had simply been stressful, and she accepted the answer, but I could tell she wasn't completely convinced. Then an unexpected opportunity appeared. My office scheduled a meeting in the same business district where my wife worked. It wasn't planned, and I almost didn't go because another coworker offered to cover it. At the last minute, I decided to attend in person. After the meeting ended earlier than expected, I found myself standing outside with an hour to spare. I remembered that my wife had told me she would be working late again, so I considered surprising her with a coffee. As I walked toward her office building, I kept telling myself this was just a kind gesture. I wasn't trying to catch anyone or prove anything. I wanted reassurance more than evidence. I wanted to walk in, see her busy at work, laugh at my own doubts, and leave feeling embarrassed for letting my imagination get the better of me. But life rarely follows the story we hope for. Before I reached the entrance, I noticed a familiar figure leaving the building. It was my wife. She wasn't alone. Walking beside her was a man I recognized from a company newsletter she had once shown me, her boss. They weren't doing anything inappropriate. They were simply talking as they crossed the parking lot. Yet what caught my attention was how comfortable they seemed together, sharing a private conversation that continued even after they reached a nearby cafe instead of heading to their cars. I stayed where I was, hidden by the crowd of people leaving nearby offices. My heart was pounding, not because I had discovered the truth, but because I suddenly realized how little I actually knew. There could still be an innocent explanation. It could have been a work discussion, a delayed meeting, or something completely ordinary. Then, just as I convinced myself to walk away, I saw something that made me stop in my tracks. A third person stepped out of the cafe, looked directly at me, and quietly said, "I think we need to talk before you jump to any conclusions." At that moment, I realized this story was far more complicated than I had ever imagined. I stared at the stranger for a moment, unsure whether to walk away or listen. He introduced himself as someone who had worked with my wife's department for several years. His expression wasn't dramatic or mysterious. Instead, he seemed genuinely concerned that I might misunderstand what I had just seen. He quietly explained that my wife and her boss had been working closely on a major project that required long hours, frequent meetings, and difficult decisions. That alone didn't answer every question, but it reminded me that appearances can easily lead us in the wrong direction. Even so, I knew I couldn't keep living with uncertainty. That evening, after our daughter had gone to bed, I asked my wife if we could have an honest conversation. There were no raised voices, no accusations, and no attempts to win an argument. I simply told her how distant we had become and how the unanswered questions were affecting our family. For a long time, she sat in silence before finally admitting that she had made choices that damaged the trust between us. She explained that during a difficult period in our marriage, she had grown emotionally close to her boss. Instead of talking to me about the struggles we were facing, she had turned to someone else for support. She admitted that she should have been honest much earlier and accepted responsibility for hiding the truth. Hearing those words was painful, but what hurt even more was realizing how many opportunities we had both missed to communicate before our relationship reached that point. The months that followed were filled with difficult decisions. We eventually chose to end our marriage peacefully, focusing on giving our daughter a stable and loving environment. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when anger tempted me to make choices I would later regret. Instead, I focused on rebuilding my own life, putting my energy into my career, my family, and being the father my daughter deserved. Years passed, and life slowly moved forward. Then came my daughter's wedding, where my ex-wife finally approached me with the words that had echoed in my mind ever since. "I've carried one regret for years," she said quietly. "Not just because I broke your trust, but because I let our silence become bigger than our family. I wish we had talked before everything fell apart." In that moment, I realized the greatest loss wasn't simply the end of our marriage. It was the years our pride had stolen from all of us. We couldn't change the past, but we could choose what kind of parents we would continue to be. As we turned toward our daughter, smiling with the family she had built, I understood that forgiveness doesn't erase painful memories. It simply allows you to stop letting those memories decide your future. That was the lesson I never expected to learn, and perhaps the most important one of all. As the wedding reception continued, I looked around the room with a different perspective. Years earlier, I would have imagined this day being filled with awkward silence and unresolved resentment. Instead, I saw two parents who had learned, through painful experience, that their daughter's happiness mattered more than holding on to old arguments. We weren't friends in the traditional sense, and we couldn't rewrite our past, but we had reached a place of mutual respect that once felt impossible. Later that evening, my daughter found a quiet moment to sit beside me. She smiled and thanked me for always showing up, whether it was school events, birthdays, graduations, or the countless ordinary days that often matter the most. Then she said something that stayed with me long after the celebration ended. "I know things weren't perfect," she said. "But you and Mom never made me feel like I had to stop loving either of you." Those words meant more than she could ever know. They reminded me that while children notice conflict, they also remember kindness, consistency, and the effort parents make to protect them during difficult times. We hadn't handled every situation perfectly, but we had eventually learned to put her needs first. As guests began leaving, my ex-wife and I shared one final conversation. There were no long speeches or dramatic apologies. We simply wished each other well and acknowledged that life had taken us in different directions. Time had changed us both. We had each made mistakes, learned difficult lessons, and discovered that healing comes from accepting the past instead of trying to relive it. Driving home that night, I realized how much my own understanding of betrayal, trust, and forgiveness had changed. For a long time, I believed that moving forward meant proving I had been right or making someone else regret their choices. But real peace arrived only when I stopped measuring my future by my past. Letting go didn't mean forgetting what happened. It meant refusing to let one chapter define the rest of my life. If there's one lesson this emotional relationship story leaves behind, it's this: trust is built through honesty, communication, and respect, and once it's damaged, rebuilding any relationship takes patience from everyone involved. Even when a marriage ends, family can still find a healthier path forward if people choose understanding over bitterness. Life doesn't always give us the ending we planned, but sometimes it gives us something just as valuable: a chance to grow, to forgive, and to become better than we were before. And as I watched my daughter begin the next chapter of her own life, I knew that was the ending our family truly needed.